Welcome, fellow book angels and people who click on videos with Rory Gilmore's face on it. You've come to the right place. Today we are talking about another phenomenon on the internet, the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge. Now, with fall approaching and fast steps, it's a perfect time to revisit this iconic list and probably one of the longest must-read lists out there. For those people who are unfamiliar with the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, it's basically a list compiling all books Rory Gilmore apparently read throughout the 7-season show of Gilmore Girls. I have no idea whether the A Year in the Life film short series counts into that as well. I don't think so, but I have looked at several lists and they all have a different number of books on it. So I do not know how accurate the list that I've used was, but I will link it down below if you want to check it out for yourself. Now, the list I referred to had 339 books on, but there were some lists with a little less books and some lists with a little bit more books on them. However, that's a crazy amount of number, especially since Rory has this one line in the show where she says that she can never read all the books in the world.
13 million volumes? I've read 300 books in my entire life and I'm already 16?
And can't any fellow bookworm relate to that part? Yeah, we all wish we could read more. When that list got popular a few years ago, people actually set themselves challenges of reading that list or reading every book on that list. I know other booktubers did some videos checking out how many books on their list did. So obviously I did that too. And did I read every book on that list? No. There are a few quite random books on the list and a few quite random books I've actually read on the list. But I did read some books Rory read as well, and that is what we're talking about here as well. I will review the books that I've read, that Rory Gilmore has read as well, which is not even near to 300 books on that list, guys, just a little spoiler. And then, yeah, we talk a little bit about the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge. Is it worth doing it? Should we do it? Why shouldn't we do it? And what does this list tell us about Rory? So without further ado, we have a lot to get through. So let's start. I have my list here, and like I said, I will just mention the books that I've read. If you want to see what other books are on that list, you can look down below, as said before. These books are also in no particular order, just the order that I've written them down. Starting strong with 1984 by George Orwell, which I've read and I didn't love. It's one of the classics. I actually, I've written that list yesterday and already forgot what's on there. If you read anything by George Orwell that I've read as well, I recommend The Animal Farm because it's quite short and it's very understandable, what it's trying to tell you. 1984 is more confusing, in my opinion. You can have another one. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I've read this, at least that's what I'm telling myself, because I listened to the audiobook when I was a child and I just said that counts. And I liked the audiobook as a child. I don't know what happens in that book, really, anymore. But back then, I liked it. Alice in Wonderland, I reread this last year and I didn't really enjoy it. So yeah, it's a bit like a fever dream. Anna Karenina, which is a Tolstoy, and it's very huge, but it basically reads like a whole gossip story. I don't know what it is. It feels like Gossip Girl, but 200 years before that. So if you're into that, you can give it a shot, but please know it is really long and there are a lot of Russian names that all sound the same. I don't know, I had problems keeping track, but maybe that was just because it had a lot of drama in it. Atonement, which was also made into a film with Keira Knightley, and I didn't get it, I guess. It is one of those books that is supposed to have a really deep meaning, and I just was like, okay, did I really need to read it? The Awakening, by Kate Chapon is a book that I've actually recently just read and I really enjoyed, and I was asking myself, why haven't I read this before? It is talking about female empowerment. It's about a woman who frees herself from her marriage and steps into her own power, and it's really short, and I think it's also written in a way that a lot of people who are just starting to read classics can really get into the writing. Another more modern classic, well, it's not that modern, but another classic I really like is The Bell Jar. Totally recommend this. I really liked it. But obviously, when I say I like a classic, please know that this does not mean there's an absence of racism or anti-Semitism. How do you say that word? I totally butchered that. Classics are often really racist, and that's not cool. And The Bell Jar also has racism in it. Wow, can I speak today? So please know this, and when reading a classic, you kind of need to be prepared for this. Not always, not all classics have that, but yeah, that doesn't mean that I am supportive of this, obviously. Just that the book still, like, for what it is a really interesting read. Beloved by Toni Morrison. I read another Toni Morrison, which is Blue Eyes, which I liked better just because I feel like I was able to really get myself into the book. Toni Morrison's writing, from what I've read so far, is not super accessible for everyone, and I had troubles getting myself into the story of Beloved, but her writing nonetheless is really important, and it's a really important piece of literature, okay? That's what it is. That's what I'm trying to say. Now to one of the random books. She read a specific author's translation of this. I've probably read another one, but it's the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hinduism writing. I hope I said that right. And I've read it because I'm a yoga teacher, and I read a book by Ram Dass who referred to this book, and I wanted to see what he's talking about. And it's not really a book, it's like a scripture, and it has kind of like the ways of life, like how you're supposed to live life, and it's told in a story, and it's not something I think everybody needs to read. That's what I want to say. If you're not spiritual, then probably you're like, what is this? I don't understand. And if you're not interested in the spear. So I don't know why Rory Gilmore read it or why it was on that list, but maybe one of you can tell me that. I've read it, however, so I put it on this list. We're moving on with a lot of classics. I've read a lot of classics, and Rory did too. So we have Brave New World, which I forgot everything about. I know I read it, I don't know what it's about, and usually I would say it means that it's not a significant bad book, but it's also not a really good book, because why did I forget what it was about? We have The Christmas Carol, which is a Christmas story. I used to hate The Christmas Carol when I was younger, but now that I'm adult, I find it really cute. So I also love Christmas, so great story to read when it's Christmas time. And there's so many adaptations, like there's musicals, there's films, there's probably a song about The Christmas Carol, and books and children's books. Anyway, then we have The Catcher in the Rye and Franny and Zoe, and I liked Franny and Zoe. I didn't like The Catcher in the Rye that much, and also I don't remember what happened, so that's probably, I'm gonna say this more than once in this video. I already said it twice, so there you go. Then another really long book, which is The Count of Monte Cristo. And I just want to say a fun fact about this book. I did enjoy the start of it. I will first do the book review. I enjoyed the start of it, and then at the end it just got dragged out. And the reason why it is so long is because back in the day when Durmaz wrote that book, he published it in chapters, so it got published in the newspaper, and kind of each week, I don't know how often they publish it, there was a new chapter published, so that way it's dragged out that long. And why I said why Durmaz wrote it is because he didn't write it on his own. He had a lot of people helping him write the story, so he did have his hands in the story, but he either corrected the writing of someone else or somebody else corrected and edited his writing. So he didn't write that book on his own, but his name is on the cover because, you know, stories sell better when a really popular author is just standing above it, now, today, as in the past. So if you didn't know that, there you go. Free knowledge from me to you. A more modern book is The Da Vinci Code, and I enjoyed it, and I especially enjoyed the start, and I was like, wow, because it's a little bit like, you feel like you're figuring it out with the characters, what is happening and going on, and I think this is really cool. And if you like this kind of stuff, The Da Vinci Code is definitely for you. And I also haven't watched the movie, so I could really enjoy the story because I had no idea what was going on. One of my, in my opinion, most beginner-friendly classics is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So if you're getting into classics, read that. It's really short, it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's interesting and a good read, and I remember I read it in a day, and I enjoyed it. I also played it in theatre once because I was a theatre kid as a child. And then COVID hit and we never got to perform it, but yeah, I have a special relationship to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Then Poems and Tales by Edgar Allan Poe. I think she read the whole collection, and then there was also another section where it was about The Raven, which I did read by Edgar Allan Poe. I didn't read all of his stuff, but I read some, so I thought I'd put it on here. And I'm not the biggest Edgar Allan Poe fan, but I think he has some good pieces in, you know, his writing. Eloise, which is a children's book that I loved as a child. I remember I loved like the little illustrations in the book, but you know, I read it as a child, so I really have no idea of what exactly happened. I remember she lived in a hotel. A book that I do remember and is my favorite by Jane Austen is Emma. That's my absolute favorite. There are more Jane Austen books on there. I think nearly all of them, like Northanger Abbey, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, maybe Mansfield Park, I'm not sure. But I've read all of Jane Austen's books and I usually enjoyed them, but my favorites are Emma, Pride and Prejudice, and then, I don't know, I like both of them, I guess. But those are my two favorite. If you want to read some of Jane Austen's books, that's what I would recommend. Northanger Abbey is also a little bit different from the other books. My friend who actually studies English literature did a whole essay on that. And I don't know, she told me what it was about, but yeah, I forgot. So that's just another half fun fact because I actually don't give you any new information. Fahrenheit 451, which I remember what it was about, but I remember not liking it that much when I read it. It's like, again, one of the stories that's supposed to be like really impactful, but I just couldn't get myself into the book. Sometimes it's the writing, sometimes it's the character, sometimes it's the story. It's just personal preference. 2 books from the same author, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven and Tuesdays with Morrie. Tuesdays with Morrie is actually like the true story, so that was what the author experienced, where he met with his like professor or like, yeah, I think professor from university, and he gives him like wisdom of life. And then The 5 People You Meet in Heaven is a fictional piece, but I love The 5 People You Meet in Heaven when I read it. So that is the one I would recommend. But I haven't read it in like years, so I don't actually know how good it is. But it was a really, really cool idea for a story. Flowers for Algernon, which I also really couldn't get myself into, but it's, once again, a really clever idea for a story, I would say. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Good. The Great Gatsby, which everybody loves. I remember it was an easy read, but I didn't love it. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, which was also really hard for me to get into. A lot of Shakespeare stuff, which I read some of. I read more because we also did it in English and we did it in theater, so we played some of his stuff. And we especially did Hamlet, and I also read Macbeth, and also Romeo and Juliet, and I read a lot of other stuff that actually wasn't on the Rory Gilmore reading list, which I was like, wait, what did I read this for then? But I would recommend, if you're not super duper pro-English and you love English and you love if Shakespeare just comes up with some words he just made up, get a comic version, because we read a comic version of Hamlet in school, which made it so much more accessible, and if you can actually understand the story, they're actually sometimes quite enjoyable, and Hamlet is actually not a bad story. So that's what I'll say. Then, for some reason, there were 2 Harry Potter books on there, the first, and then Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where I was like, why just 2? Like, you need to read the books in between. I read all of Harry Potter. My favorite is The Prisoners of Azkaban. What is yours? But the Goblet of Fire comes second. but I'm not the biggest Harry Potter fan in general. But, you know, if I had to pick, the third one's my favorite. Then, I mean, it's a children's book, but it's also like a rhyme, The Grinch Stole Christmas. I've never read the children's book, but I read the rhyme last year because, I don't know, The Grinch is kind of cool. And I wanted to read it out to my parents, but they didn't want to listen. I really like that it's just written in rhymes. Things that are written in rhymes still get me, so another Christmas classics, what can I say? The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which also has a really funny backstory, but I'm not getting into that. If you want to hear the backstory of why Victor Hugo wrote The Hunchback of Notre Dame, let me know. But it has a funny backstory, you could also look it up. Although the book, you know, it was sad. The Iliad by Homer, which I liked more than the Odyssey. And I read the Odyssey first, which you're not supposed to. The Iliad is the story before the Odyssey. Just, you know, the Greek knew their drama, right? Jane Eyre, which I really did enjoy. I didn't think I would enjoy it that much, but I did enjoy it quite a lot. Kite Runner, which I couldn't get myself into no matter how I tried. If you want to read something by the author, I would recommend A Thousand Splendid Sun, because that book broke my heart into a million pieces, and I still think about it to this day, how sad that book was. Little Woman, which is an excellent classic. It also has an excellent movie adaptation, but the book is just, it's so good. It's had everything that you want in a book and in a classic, in my opinion. Lord of the Flies I had to read in school and deal with in philosophy class, and that's where I'm leaving it at. Madame Bovary is another book I read and forgotten everything about, just like Me Talk Pretty one day. I don't know what it was about. The Metamorphosis, you know, the guy turns into a bug. It happens sometimes. It was not a bad story. It was a bit of a weird story. He dies in the end. Spoiler alert if you haven't read it. Maybe he's a bug. Middlesex I actually read recently, and I kind of didn't need to read it. I was confused with the whole of what was going on. I was just, I don't know what to say. I haven't processed this fully yet. Moby Dick, Mrs. Dalloway. I've read them and I have no feelings about either of them. Emily Dickinson's poems. You know, like it is usually with poem collections, some of them you like, some of them you don't. Neutral. I am actually neutral. I gave that book to my friend who really likes Emily Dickinson, so I hope she appreciates it more than I did. I mean, I did like them, just like I wasn't in love with them, okay? This one I really liked, and I don't know if it was a mistake on the list, but it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid. It was a specific book, but I read most of them when I was in primary school, and I just thought that counted. I love Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I also listened to the audiobooks, but that book is so great on so many levels, especially to get kids who don't like to reading. I always loved reading as a child, but I just have praise for Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I think it's an excellent book ideas for people who just started getting into reading, or if you have someone who hates reading. It has everything. It's funny, it's got comics in it, it has cool font. Great, go read Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The Perks of Being a Wallflower, I think it's also a book you can read in middle school if you're a smart middle schooler, which I'm assuming if you're watching this video and you are in middle school. I was so sad. This book, like the film and the book, I loved when I was younger. Picture of Dorian Gray is one of the most hyped books out there. It's not my favorite piece of the author, which name I know, but it just, Oscar Wilde. I was like, why can't I recall it right now? Pressure of Filming, which is not my favorite piece by Oscar Wilde, but it is a really, you know, cool concept. I mean, we're still talking about the idea of like Dorian Gray. You know, it's kind of like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde case, but but again, I read it, but it's not one of my favorite classics. Pinocchio, another children's book classic that is really traumatizing for some reason. Rebecca, which is interesting, but I was so upset with the man she marries. Oh, I can't stand that man the whole time, so didn't enjoy it as much. A Room of One's Own, which is really significant, especially if you know how Virginia Woolf writes. I'm actually not the biggest fan of anything I've read by Virginia Woolf, but I think she's a really interesting persona. I mean, she's dead. Because the way she wrote things was she like literally sat down and she just wrote. She like wrote for like basically days without kind of stopping, and then she didn't like check her writing again. That was it. And then they published it, which I think you need to take into account when reading it. And I think what would help is if you read A Room of One's Own in one piece, because I think especially like I think they are divided in chapters. It was a while ago when I read it. Especially reading those like in one piece, I think can be really helpful in understanding her making an argument, because she wrote it kind of in a streak of consciousness. Flipping the page. Don't worry, it's not that much more. We're nearing an end. To Kill a Mockingbird, which I also read when I was younger and I thought was really significant and a really great piece of literature. It is about racism from a white person's perspective, so before reading this you need to take that into account. And I also actually haven't managed yet to read any criticism about the book, which I bet there is. But read the book yourself. I think it's a really nice piece of work. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which I read last year and I loved. I found the book really comforting in a bittersweet way. It's just really beautiful the way the story is told and narrated, and I don't know, I just want to read it again, kind of. We have another Kafka, which is The Trial. Kafka is like Virginia Woolf to me. I rather like to read about the author than their work. But every time I read about the author, like I learn something new. I want to read their work because just so interesting, like who they were as people. That's my review of The Trial. Learn more about Kafka, I guess. Uncle Tom's Cabin, I read in school, and wow, that book is really significant, but it's also really heart-wrenching, obviously. And it plays such a significant role in history as well. That's my review. Yeah, that's what it is as a book. The Virgin Suicide, which I would recommend instead of Middlesex because it's by the same author. The Wizard of Oz, which is a magical little children's story. I mean, it's also for adults, but I think it was meant for children. My favorite classic, maybe unpopular opinion, I don't know, maybe that probably tells you too much about who I am, but Wuthering Heights, I don't know why I loved Wuthering Heights that much, I just really do. And last but not least is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion, which actually got me into reading more Joan Didion. That's what I will say. Now, these are all the books I've read on that list, but I will mention now some books that are on the Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge list that I want to get reading and that are on my TBR. The Diary of Anne Frank, As I Lay Dying, Bel Canto, The Art of Fiction, Brick Lane, Carrie by Stephen King, Collected Stories of Eudora Welty, Emily the Strange. It's another graphic novel, okay? I love graphic novels. The Fortress of Solitude, Girl Interrupted, which is supposed to be like the bell jar, kind of, because the woman is in the same ward as Sylvia Plath was treated in. Crazy, right? It's a true story. The God of Small Things, Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, The Nanny Diaries, which sounds fun, On the Road, and this has been on my reading list for literally years, The Valley of Dolls. If you have any Rory Gilmore reading list TBR, please comment down below. I would love to hear it. Now, here are my thoughts to the reading challenge itself. I think it's a fun idea, but I would say I use this list as inspiration for other things that I would like to read and to get aware of, because I literally did find some gems on there. And if you've listened to this whole video, my reviews of the books that I've read, I'm either really neutral or I did like the books. There's barely anything on there that I would say I hated. Actually, I think I hated none of the books. But that is also because a lot of the books are classics, at least the ones that I've read. And that's another characteristic you have to learn about the list. A lot of classic books on there, which I think were put on there by intention because we see Rory Gilmore as this smart and well-read kid. And what screams education more than that you've read a lot of classics? But please know that this doesn't mean, if you've never read a classic before, this doesn't mean that you're not educated. Also, a lot of the literature is obviously Western based, so it's like Western classics and books that, you know, are considered to be meaningful and important in America, because Rory Gilmore is American. And so a lot of books that can be just as significant or maybe are even more important are not on the list because we're not aware of them in our Western sphere. Also, The Gilmore Girl aired over 20 years ago, and some books that might have been of great significance back then, and that is why maybe Rory Gilmore read them in the show or they were put on there, maybe are not as significant now. But it's interesting to also see, okay, what were people dealing with back then? I don't know who curated this list and decided what to go on that list, you know, what books were mentioned in the show, but it was made with the intention of creating this persona of Rory Gilmore. So if anybody is a film student like me and is like, let's do a study of Rory Gilmore and who she is as a character using the books she's read, I think this is really an interesting, cool thing, and you can do a really big deep dive. I bet there are YouTube videos on that. I just would like to remind you that I don't think it should be anybody's goal to read the entire list, because that will not magically transform you into Rory Gilmore, and you shouldn't want to be Rory Gilmore. You should want to be yourself, but use it as an inspiration for new reading material to like expand your horizon, and maybe also reading some things that are outside of your comfort zone, whether that is reading more classics or just reading a book you wouldn't usually pick up, because I think this is also something that the list kind of reflects on. It's not always the most comforting books on that list. There are a lot of books that deal with really heavy topics, whether it's considered a classic or not, or just in general books that are now considered being of significance. Also, there are obviously some more fun books on there, which are usually children's books, which I'm either just considering Rory maybe read when she was younger, even though I know there's this one line by his grandpa referring to what Rory read when she was younger, which was definitely not children's literature. But this, I really still like that children's literature is on there, because it's often overlooked and we like belittle it a little because it's for children. Okay, that wasn't funny, but you get what I'm saying, which isn't the case at all. Like I said with The Diary of the Wimpy Kid, children's literature is so important into sparking a love for reading for young adults that will then later, you know, carry out through the life. I mean, if you were someone who started reading at a young age, you probably still remember the books you've loved back then and are forever thankful you got to read them. And this is also a reminder for adults, if you're in a reading slump, go pick up some children's literature. And maybe not just picture books, but some books that, you know, you can also enjoy, because they are usually written in a little bit more accessible language because they're for children, but they're also usually a lot shorter, and it's just wonderful to dive into the magic that was created and get creative and, you know, get reading again. So I will continue seeing what I will read throughout my life. I will definitely not check off that entire list. I mean, it's a lot of books. I mean, I've read over 300 books in my life because I'm crazy like that. But some of the books on the list just don't interest me. Like I said with the Bhagavad Gita, there's no point in reading this unless it's actually a topic you're interested in. So whenever you're picking up a book, ask yourself, why am I reading this? Is this because somebody told me I need to read it because it's a classic or it's on Rory Gilmore's reading list? Or is this something that is close to my heart and I want to learn more? Or am I reading it because I want to step outside of my comfort zone? Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'm doing more bookish contents, vlogs, and also yoga videos on here because I have a lot of things I love and I just want to share them on here on YouTube. Wow, it's been a long video. It's been a long time talking. Thank you so much for staying till now. Maybe give it a follow or like or comment. I would really, really appreciate this. Sending you lots of love, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, maybe with a good book. Bye!